Good afternoon to most, and good evening to some. My name is Puisan Tam, and I am the chair of the Netherland-America Foundation's Northern California chapter. I am pleased to be moderating our conversation about the book Het Geheim van Silicon Valley. And I'm excited for us to learn about the secret of Silicon Valley from a Dutch perspective. Before I introduce the authors, let me say a few words about the NAF. The Netherland-America Foundation, the NAF, is the leading bilateral foundation initiating and supporting high-impact exchanges between the Netherlands and the United States. The NAF seeks to further strengthen the bonds between our two countries through exchange in the arts, sciences, education, business, and public affairs. NAF activities provide access to a broad network of educational, cultural, and business opportunities that connect Dutch and American organizations and individuals and help build partnerships among them. On the NAF NorCal board, I'm joined by Mark van der Straten, Willem Jonkheer, Peter de Vijter, and Jared Bodem. For helping to make this event possible, many thanks to my colleague Jared and to the NAF's Laura Crow, who is based in New York. I would also like to thank Holland in the Valley, represented here by Community Manager Dorit Roos. Hi Dorit, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you. I am very happy to play a small role in bringing the story of Eva and Wibe to you, the NAF and Holland in the Valley communities. For us, it's super important to bring you all together, to learn from each other and to build a strong network of people with orange hearts, as we like to say. Way too often, we see that without the proper network, opportunities for growth and innovation are missed. And that's why we started Holland in the Valley. We are the Dutch ecosystem in the Valley, a close network of entrepreneurs, mentors, locals, and insiders that are empowering entrepreneurship and innovation to scale in the Valley. And we do that by our 3 pillars: programs, content, and events like this one. I think Holland in the Valley is a great example on how American and Dutch leaders from both the private and the public sectors, as well as the academic world, join forces to boost both economies, of course, but most of all solve the global challenges together. And for that, we believe that we need that Silicon Valley mindset. So back to you, Puisan, and let's get started.
Thank you, Dorit. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce the authors of Het Geheim van Silicon Valley. Wibe Wagemans is a pioneer, serial entrepreneur, and CEO in the Valley. He was the first in the world to build an AI bot and an online video game for mobile. His work at Angry Birds, Big Fish, Huge, and others earned him the Cannes Golden Lion Award, the world record of #1 hits in the App Store, and several exits. Wibe ran a $1 billion business at Nokia and was an expat and student in 6 countries. And we also have Eva Schram, who is a Dutch journalist living in the San Francisco Bay Area and working as a US correspondent for the Dutch Financial Times and the Belgian Knap. She covers large tech companies and diversity and representation in Silicon Valley. Eva was previously editor-in-chief of Sargasso and an investigative journalist for One World. Thank you for being here, both of you. We are so happy to have them both here today. Now, before I start asking my first question to you, I encourage all of you viewers to ask your questions by typing them in the chat. You can find the chat in the right side of the video on YouTube if you're using your computer. And at the end of the event, Wibe and Eva will select the person who asks the best question to receive a free copy of the book. So there's the book. So ask away and good luck. Now, Wibe and Eva, to kick off this conversation, with COVID, shelter in place, and there's also Zoom, is Silicon Valley really the place to be? Who wants to go first? Maybe Wibe?
Yes, thanks for having us, Puisan. This is a pleasure. It's also been a pleasure to have written the book together with Eva, even though we've never met in person. So back to your question. It's interesting that a lot has happened outside of Silicon Valley innovation the last couple of decades and the last few years in particular. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the data, the power and the money is more centralized in Silicon Valley than ever before. What we're seeing right now with headlines all over the world is a couple of big companies, HP Enterprise, Oracle, moving for tax reasons mostly to Texas. But there's still 99.9% of the companies stay put. Some of the employees are allowed, and some of them will fall back in line and move back to the office. But there is a trend now that most companies will allow some sort of remote working, part-time or full-time. What we do think is going to change is that this allows us that you'll see VCs that kind of forced startups to be present in the Valley, on an hour drive from Sand Hill Road to join board meetings, and was kind of a requirement for an investment, maybe as recent as 10 years ago. Today, with Zoom, we see investments have not stopped, right, this year. It's almost or higher in some cases, and depending on which category you're looking at, but higher almost than last year in some categories. The interesting thing that we're seeing is that they're now investing just based on Zoom meetings, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, that's actually really good news to hear also for startups that are not in the Valley, right? Because then they don't have to necessarily be here. They can actually get an investment from anywhere in the world. Eva,
well, yeah, so it presents a great opportunity. I think that we're getting used to, working closely together, and we're getting used to, Wibe and I did it that way. As he said, we never met before. We wrote the book just by using modern communication technology, and it can actually, I feel like I know Wibe pretty well, even though I've never met him in person. So it really presents an opportunity for you to actually make that connection to the Valley, even if you're not based there, I think. And I think people should try and optimize that opportunity.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, because like you said, you wrote this book without meeting each other. So, there's an opportunity. I see there are some questions in the chat room, so maybe we can pull up one. So I have a question here from Dirk Jansen. Does the Netherlands need to do more to attract US VC firms to open up shop in the Netherlands?
My short answer is no. My long answer is over time it will happen automatically. I think that the first and foremost, the Netherlands needs to get its house in order. There's not even a foundation there yet, and people, if you ask people, is the Netherlands an innovative country? And most will say, yeah, we rank number 4 on the World Economic Forum list. If you look at the data that we've gathered in our book, it's complete nonsense. The Netherlands, if you look at the most important metrics of innovation, the Netherlands is not a player, and has not even increased the market share over the last 10 years, which is quite remarkable. I actually thought, we're doing pretty well compared to 10 years ago, but the data that we gathered from the most, the most trustworthy resource out there, which is PitchBook, shows us that the market share is still far below 1%. It's not even at 0.5%, and exits it's even lower in VC money, which is where the innovation is coming from. So that's a really good parameter. The reason why I'm saying no is because first and foremost, in the early startup stage, the Netherlands needs to get the ecosystem in place with the local players, and only then does it make sense to get the top experienced guys from the Valley over. Right now, it doesn't make any sense to invite them over when the foundation is not there.
Thank you, Wibe. And also thank you to Dirk Jansen, who is the Consul General of the Netherlands in San Francisco. All right, let's go maybe a little bit more about the book. So the book is called The Secret of Silicon Valley. Is there really just one secret?
No, and that's a bit of a, I mean, obviously there are many aspects to the Valley that are worth learning about, but we called it The Secret to be, kind of enticing. And if you have to decide on one secret, like the secret of Silicon Valley, we think it's the networks and the way that people are ready to help another person, and even if there's nothing in it for them, so pay it forward. The idea that by all working to be your best and to get the best results, the entire ecosystem grows. So utilizing that and actively participating in it, and also making sure you contribute to it, I think that's the secret. But there's many other aspects of the Valley that are mentioned in the book and that are very helpful to learn about.
So when you talk about the main secret is the network, maybe Wibe and Eva, maybe you can share a little bit about your experience in that. Like, how did you set up your network here? So you can share that with the people that are listening in.
I mean, I started out and I started cooperating with Sequoia on Sand Hill Road in my first few days. I thought I understood at least a little bit about the Valley when I moved there. I'd lived in the US for a while. I'd lived in Japan and in other countries, and I thought, how hard can it be, right? This is just the US. And it turned out that it's quite different. It's completely different from LA. LA to me is much more superficial plastic than the Valley. The Valley is to me much more authentic about really getting shit done, and much more a meritocracy. It's different from Seattle, which I find very passive aggressive. If you stick some labels on and you generalize it, different from the East Coast. So yeah, I found a very different place. And one of my first experiences was when I moved to the Valley, was in the Sequoia office. Everything was one phone call away. It was just absolutely weird. One of the startups I was with, before they signed a term sheet for $2 million, all it took was one phone call to a product manager at Google. Hey, is this on your roadmap in the next 18 months? No? Okay, we got a window of opportunity. We'll sign a one-page term sheet, done. It was unbelievable. And every CEO in the Valley is one phone call away. And that's the issue, really, and that's what we're trying to convey in the book. What needs to happen is these CEOs in the Netherlands, the Helmond CEO doesn't even call the CEO in Eindhoven, and that's a problem.
Eva, did you want to add to that? Like, how about your own experience? How did you set up the network here?
Well, I actually used a lot of contacts with my fellow countrymen. So I would see, because when I first got here, obviously I'm a reporter. I'm not an entrepreneur. So I'm not looking for investments. I'm not looking, to pitch my startup to anyone. But I'm still looking for information and contacts. So I am building a network always. And when I first started out here, one big thing for me was just reach out to Dutch people, even if I didn't think, or even if I couldn't really write about them, or they didn't have any information that was, something I was going to write about. It was still a good way to build up my network, and they knew people they introduced me to, or even if I wanted to write about, a bigger company like Google, and I didn't know, like, their press office for a long time ignored me. I just found Dutch people working at Google and see if they could, fight my fight and get my emails answered and stuff like that. That way, because I'm Dutch people want to help other Dutch people. That's a really good way to start. And then, slowly it grows. I went to a lot of meetups. I went to a lot of events when those were still happening in San Francisco. So that you just keep going. And sometimes it's hard, but most of the time people will be very open and welcoming. So that's the best way to just keep going.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point where you're saying the tip that you just gave the viewers. I mean, sometimes even, if it's not right away the right person that you want to reach at that company, you have that Dutch connection. You can start with that person first, right? Because that person is more likelier to answer you. All right, I think there was a question from the viewers. Like, can we pull up a question? Okay, there's a question from Gregory Bell. What are the key elements that Silicon Valley offers that other parts of the world have not been able to duplicate?
I think the best answer to that lies in what was it Duckworth, a professor at Berkeley, mentioned, and we quote her in our book. She basically says, it's hard to replicate. You don't have to replicate Silicon Valley. But even if you're on the other side of the world, 9 time zones away, what is the most important piece? And it is, how well are you connected to what's happening in Silicon Valley? And I think that's absolutely key. You will never replicate the concentration of talent, no matter how many people are going to move out of San Francisco and the Valley, right? Which is happening right now and getting the headlines. I still think it's just an absolute tiny sliver of companies moving away. So it sounds like the whole valley is emptying. That's not the case. My recommendation for companies around the world, whether they're in Asia, South America, Europe, is try, and there's a separate chapter in the book on this topic, try to establish an advisory board. It could be scientists, it could be folks that help you scale, it could be distribution, could be an executive coach to drive your emotional intelligence. But tap into that network in the valley, because most of these people have done it 10 or 100 times, and you're just reinventing the wheel.
Thank you. And then is there another question that we can pull up? I see people are active here. That's really good. Everyone wants to win the book, right? So Andy Bender. Andy is actually the chair of the Netherland-America Foundation. What will be the long-term impact of working from home on company culture?
It's a tough one, especially in the early days. I do see creative process. So two processes I see suffering, and then I'll get to your culture question. The first process I see suffering is the face-to-face enterprise sales role that is not working as effectively as it did in face-to-face. It really requires face-to-face meetings to do proper enterprise sales. That's number one. The other one is the creative process, whether it's with designers, product management, engineers. Just lock some people in a room with a whiteboard, right? A lot of people are visual. That element is missing, apart from the nonverbal communication, right? Just the fact that you're not looking into the camera, right? Right now, we're looking at the screen instead of the camera. In our brain, that gets processed differently than if you look somebody in the eye. So that in itself already has, requires that you have a different association with that person. I think it has a negative effect on the culture. We've seen some experiments, back to the culture question. Yahoo did a remote, I think they allowed their workforce partly, or I think it was part of the week, to work remotely a couple of years ago, way before COVID. And it didn't really work. Number one problem was discipline and peer-to-peer communication. So it suffers, especially in the early days of a startup, because it's all about ideation. So I think it's going to take much longer. And at the end of the day, for those type of processes, you still need to lock people up in a room.
So really interesting. Let's see. There's a question from Floris van der Meer. You guys praised the network effect present in the Valley. Among others, Oracle moved its headquarters away from the Valley recently. What is your view on this trend?
Well, I actually just wrote about this for the Dutch Financial Times. It ties into what we were talking about before, right? That COVID is really an opportunity to diversify your workforce. I mean, the main reasons were financial for them to move, I'm sure, but it also allows them to attract a different workforce. Silicon Valley obviously has many, many issues with attracting a lot of qualified workers. So, or even if you can't attract them, they can't afford to live here. So it offers some opportunities in that sense. But the trend of companies moving away has been going on for a few years. If you look at the data, the headquarters tend to stay in Silicon Valley. So the decisions stay in Silicon Valley. That's HP and Oracle are a change from that because they're moving to headquarters, but it's not, I don't think, as Wibe said, it's not like the Valley is empty, just the pressure is off a little bit because some larger companies are moving away. And with all the modern communication tools that we talked about earlier, those companies can still remain doing the same, can work together effectively still. And once COVID is over, they can also travel back and forth a lot more. Houston is not that far.
Yeah, and a lot is window dressing. Let's not forget, we're talking about a couple of headlines. Larry Ellison moved to Hawaii. He didn't move to Texas. There's no state income tax in Texas, which is a major incentive for a lot of these people. The same with Musk. Musk is not all of a sudden, he claims he's moving to Texas, but right now he's commuting between LA and the Valley because Tesla is still in Fremont. And he's not going to move away from Tesla anytime soon. So I think there's a lot of window dressing going on for the negotiations with the governor of California to lower the taxes. And there's also all other stuff going on that has nothing to do, because don't expect that there's going to be hundreds of thousands of engineers waiting in Austin that are ready to take a job. It's not the case.
Plus, I was looking into some data when I was writing about this, and the entire state of Texas has about 500 venture capitalists headquartered there. The Bay Area alone, so that's not even all of California, it's the Bay Area, has over 2,000. So there's still, the capital is still here, and the people who invest that capital are mostly here. It's growing in other regions as well, and Silicon Valley is, in that sense, I guess, expanding to other cities in the U.S., but the main part of it's still here.
Yeah, it sounds like Silicon Valley is an ecosystem, right? And it's so special, and it's been here for so long. Even though with now some of the big companies are moving away, it doesn't necessarily change that this is the ecosystem. We have a question from Marcel Fahaya. What will be the effect of I think this is a similar question, right? What will be the effect of the exodus of big companies like Oracle, HP, Enterprise, and possibly Tesla from Silicon Valley to the innovation power? I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Well, I wanted to add, it's interesting that HP Enterprise, that's the one moving, not HP Inc. So HP Enterprise sells the enterprise the gear, network gear and everything. HP Inc. is still here. They're the ones selling the computers and the printers. Plus, the innovation hub of the one that moved to Texas, HPE, is going to stay in San Jose. So I guess that tells you a little bit.
All right, thank you. Lamar, friends of Lamar, what secrets to success can our homegrown entrepreneurs learn from their Dutch-born counterparts?
It's a good starting point. Unfortunately, there are way too few. So hopefully we can have way more Dutch entrepreneurs in the Valley. Unfortunately, there's only a few handfuls of serial entrepreneurs here who have founded companies here and done it multiple times. I consider my experience level at the moment completely different from when I did my first startup. So you make a lot of more mistakes. You hit your head against the wall. But I think that's what it takes. You to connect with people who have experience helps, and that's one of the incentives of the book is the pay it forward principle. But what we really see in the Netherlands or elsewhere is it's not just the unwritten rules. It's just some of these standard operating procedures in Silicon Valley that we take for granted. They don't even know in most countries, or if you go to Amsterdam or you go to an incubator at the university, they have never heard of that. And I talk to startups and scale-ups in the Netherlands with CEOs that have spoken to a lot of so-called experts, and I don't consider myself an expert at all, right? I'm calling on experts because I have a lot of flaws and blind and weak spots. But I noticed that they put a lot of trust in people that just are not even close to what I'm used to in the Valley, and that is very unfortunate. So we're really trying to fill that gap a little bit.
I think we saw another question that was asked by Vincent. You want to pull that one up? So Vincent Storymans, the Deputy Consul General of the Netherlands in San Francisco. Are Dutch people in the Valley generally willing to give back to Dutch entrepreneurs in your experience? Do we need to do better?
Short answer, yes. That's an easy one. But the example I've given Vincent in the past as well is the Silicon Vikings. And what came out of that started, I don't know, 10 years ago to 10 years ago. But what came out of it is the Nordic Innovation House. So the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, what they have today, they have the Nordic Innovation House. They have their own incubators. They have their own experts. They introductions to. So they're much more advanced. I'm not saying that Dutch are not doing this, right? We have the Holland in the Valley. We have the consulate, tremendous team. We have Dorit and the team doing a great job. Michael Doyers. But we're I would say we're 5 to 10 years behind the Nordic countries. So I think that's a great benchmark.
But would you say is that a cultural thing for the Dutch, like because they maybe are not into that paying that forward idea of it?
No, because I mean, obviously they don't understand the pay it forward principle, which we're trying to explain. But that's not the reason, because I can tell you the most of the Nordic people I know are much more risk averse than the Dutch, which is kind of weird. So it's not I don't think it's a cultural issue. It's more that we don't have enough people who have the experience.
Eva, did you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I will say that in my experience, again, I was looking for different things from people than connections to get capital or whatever. But in my experience, Dutch people love helping out other Dutch people, especially if you're both abroad. It kind of creates a connection, right? If you're both out here by yourself, far away from home. So I don't think it's an unwillingness or anything. It's just not very common, maybe.
Yeah, I do see we have a lot of questions here. So again, that's very good. Keep on asking. I see now on the screen, Frode, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Frode Odegaard.
Frode.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Didn't the Germans have a center too on University Avenue somewhere? Wibe, do you know that?
Yeah, it's the Hanna House on University Avenue. It's a great setup. It's just a coffee shop, and then if you want a table or a meeting room, you pay. It's a great place to meet angels and VCs. The central location. It's sponsored. Actually, it's not. I don't think the German government or a non-profit is behind it. I think it's sponsored by SAP, obviously a big German international. So that's the answer to that. I would like to add that Germany just announced last month they're putting 10 billion euros into the startup ecosystem. That's something the Netherlands should do, which we make a very clear case in our book with clear data why the Netherlands needs to do something different, similar. Nordic countries, same thing. Finland has done, when it comes to investment levels, way more than the Netherlands, with one third of the population, with exits way bigger. With and I don't think that the Dutch government understands that this long term this drives taxes. A company called Supercell from Helsinki got 7 million in subsidies and funding through the government directly and through their non-profits that got the money got funneled through, and they're paying on average, the last 10 years they've paid on average 100 million in taxes. So that's one, and I'm not even talking about the money, the ROI, return on investment, that the government made on the shares they got. That's number one. I don't think the government and non-profit understand that's what is at stake. But there's an even bigger case to be made, which is about the welfare state. Finland was, as recent as 5 years ago, was called the sick man of Europe. And the reason was because the innovation stalled, right? Nokia imploded, which was the last behemoth from Europe. Since Nokia, Europe has not seen a big technology play anymore. And I don't see any single one at the horizon, because the ecosystem is just not there. It's all coming from the Valley or from China. And what you're seeing now is that what Finland turned it around. So they put in, I think it was 1.5 billion in VC capital alone, not just in scale-ups, but they really started at the seed level and the angel level. That's what it takes. And you can turn it around and really have an impact on the startup ecosystem. But what is much more important to the general population, which is, hey, let's keep our welfare state intact or even improve it.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that you mentioned that as well in your book, right? That Silicon Valley, I mean, there are many reasons for Silicon Valley being the Silicon Valley it is today, but part of it is also the investments from the government, right? The government's role in it. And you see it in other countries around the world as well. Israel, for example, is also one of those countries, and they have to do it, right? Because they're trying to, it's sometimes for a government also a necessity. Okay, I see a question from Marcel Verheijen. The antitrust investigations in the big GAFAM, will this, if they get regulated, open up more opportunities for Dutch companies to be more successful in high tech?
Well, that's a good question. I hope so. We hope so. But the first thing to note is that those cases. So right now, we're looking at America at least. Only Google and Facebook have been, actually presented a case. The other ones are still investigations, and it depends on how they end. It's going to take years. But if the government's really opening up some key APIs for other companies, that could open up the field. I know that the U.S. government is asking Facebook to disinvest from WhatsApp and Instagram, but I don't know. It seems unlikely to me that's going to happen, but I might be too pessimistic.
Yeah, if I can add two points. One is hopefully there's going to be some movement, but that's not only going to be beneficial for the Dutch startups. That's going to be worldwide. So that's number one. Secondly, I'm very concerned that even if there is going to be some action, which is desperately needed, not just for Facebook, and I'm concerned that it's going to be split ups, which is completely stupid in my view. What needs to happen is split ups only make sense to a certain extent. What they should do is open up APIs. They should open up APIs for Snap. They should open up APIs for Facebook, for Messenger, for Google, for Gmail, for Maps. Across the line, Microsoft as well. You saw what happened 20 years ago with Microsoft. Microsoft walked away with a $1 trillion prize, right? It was a joke. And I'm very concerned that's the same what's happening right now. And it both concerns DC with K Street, the lobbying that's going on, as well as what's going on in Brussels. It's really a joke, to be honest.
And we have here, it looks like a question for you, Eva, from Marcel van Beusekom. A question about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Have you seen any shifts away from the typical tech white male image in Silicon Valley, and which efforts of impactful change have you seen? So maybe first Eva and then Wibe can touch on that as well.
Yeah. People are saying yes, they're moving away from the tech white male image. It's not really happening at the speed that I would like to see, and I sometimes question the real rigor with which people are trying to make this happen. When you look at venture capital being invested, but also hiring at major startups or major companies, it remains pretty flat. It was going better. Corona has hit women and people of color harder in this field than others. So there's still an enormous wage gap, but there's an enormous wealth gap. So inequity, and even we quote I don't remember the exact percentages, but we quote a survey in the book, only 2 years old, I think, in which a sizable percentage of investors said that they think women get too much venture capital invested each year. It was like 20% or something, and then another 20% said they might be getting more than they deserve, or something. Again, don't pin me on these percentages, but it was sizable, and so that just tells you something about some of the way of thinking. Still, that said, there's plenty of people trying to do better, and there's like Google is not in their hiring. They're not hiring that much more women than they used to, or at least percentage-wise. They've grown enormously. So in numbers, they hire more women than they did before, but percentage-wise, it's still the same. But they have succeeded in getting more women in senior positions, so promoting them more aggressively. I feel a lot of people in the Valley want to do better, but it's not going as quickly as I would hope.
Yeah, and I think that especially now with COVID and, in some counties in San Francisco, the schools are still not open. And so you still see, maybe they were making progress, but COVID's probably going to give women a setback, right? Because a lot of women, we hear that they actually gave up their jobs just because they have to be home. They don't have a choice.
Well, so if you look at venture capital and being invested, that's clear now that it was going. There was a increasing every year until 2019, and then 2020 it went down again. I don't know for hiring, but because I haven't looked at the data, but I'm sure that's very true.
Wibe, did you wanted to add to that? What do you see?
Yeah, two short points. One is yes, it's a huge problem. We are addressing it to quite an extent in our book. What we do see is on one hand that the international. So what most people from outside the valley usually don't see is that of all the founders, I think it's just over 50% are not born in the US. We're not even counting the first generation. And then if you look at management team members of successful startups, it's something like 70, 80%. So that's so there is some diversity, but and then there's at least international, but there's a huge problem with regards to minorities inside the US for sure, as well as women, like you mentioned. Second point I'd like to make is the biggest problem I see is the start of the pipeline, the equality of opportunity that we are very used to in a place like the Netherlands doesn't exist in the US. So I, for example, this is just a drop in the bucket, but I started a foundation 7-8 years ago where we're just helping underprivileged kids that would never ever be able to go to college to give them help them with that. But that's really a problem. Until that is solved, you'll never see a structural change on this issue, in my view.
We have a question here from the audience, Steven Nijenhuis. What is for you the biggest difference in working with American businesses and people compared to the Dutch businesses? And do you see a difference with the States itself?
Okay, I'll give it a try. Working with American businesses, I would say, let's focus Silicon Valley first, and then we can look at some more regional differences. The Valley is all about results, and we just talked about diversity, and there's this huge gateway, right, that is closed for so many people. So but having said that, once you're inside that gate, then it's a ridiculous meritocracy. What I mean by that is, and you see, actually, the funny thing is that Asian women do really well even better than white women. Asian women do really well in Silicon Valley, relatively speaking. But it's based on meritocracy. You don't deliver. It's all about accountability. You don't deliver. You don't get shit done. It's the end of the story. That mindset that you don't see it that much elsewhere. Not even in a tough place now like New York, I would say.
But let me just follow up on what you just said. You said that Asian women are actually doing really well. Like, so what is the reason? What is the difference between why Asian women will be doing?
Let's separate them in two groups. Because I lived in Asia as well, and I think I have a little bit of understanding what's going on. One is the group that was first generation, because there's a lot going on. I think it's the focus of a lot of parents. The number one goal in life is to get their kids to the right university. That's number one, and as a result, because of that focus, you see Vietnamese refugees that got off the boat in the 70s, right? And they all go to the top universities. With that maniacal focus, where the parents just do whatever it takes. They'll run a petrol station. They'll clean hotel rooms to just make it happen. You don't have that same determination with education on the first spot for their children with the other first generation. So I think that's one of the drivers. But then you look at the education. They're super well educated. The Chinese and Indian ladies are from Singapore, but especially Chinese and Indian women that come from the absolute best universities, right? Where millions of kids apply, and they come and study in the US, and they get their jobs. They get their H-1B visas. They have to wait for 25 or 100 years for their green card, but still they work their ass off to just make it happen. I think that's that mentality, and also being in that very select group of talent that makes a difference.
Yeah, and
If I can circle back to the question about, the biggest difference in working with American businesses compared to Dutch businesses, obviously, again, I'm a reporter, so I'm kind of looking at it from a distance, right? But I interviewed a Dutch guy who works at, I'm blanking on it right now, but he mentioned like for Americans, everything is competitive. And in the end, Americans define success as being, the winner. And Dutch people tend to define success more as being happy. And so I think that's a big cultural difference that really translates into like the business world too, in how you, run your business. I'm not saying that Dutch entrepreneurs are like, well, as long as I'm happy, it's a good business. But there is I think it rings true. So there's a certain cultural difference there, I think. And I think that translates into everything.
Yeah, and they're talking about these cultural differences and the different in mindset, so that we can have this bridge to this next question that's been on the screen for a while now. So Frode, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your name. So he wanted to know, can you say a bit more about the mindset differences between Silicon Valley and the European tendency toward top-down innovation, stimulation, and central planning?
I don't believe in. I don't think there's such a thing as top-down innovation. That doesn't exist in my view. It comes from, and we've seen that in multiple ecosystems. It all comes from the individual. It needs to have it needs to have a fertile ground. Don't get me wrong. And the fertile ground can come from above, right? Can come down. But the actual innovation will always come from an individual that either alone or usually in a team makes it happen. And that is because of mostly grit, as we explain in our book. But that whole process is a very individual process with a lot of ego and stubbornness and passion. That I don't think that's top down at all.
I will say that the way this question is phrased, I'm always quick to say, well, and we mentioned it before, that I agree with Wibe, but that the Silicon Valley wouldn't have existed in its current form without major investments from the U.S. government, right? Mostly the Department of Defense. And it's not that they planned what kind of innovation needed to happen, but they did put up a lot of capital to make it happen. And then still individuals and companies came with it, delivered that innovation, but they created the fertile ground for it to grow. And so it's always, I think people tend to forget that the Valley was helped decades ago by a lot of investments or government involvement.
Okay, now we have a question from Dennis van Ham. Do you see less or more US companies trying to scale up in Europe, starting in the Netherlands as a test market?
I don't have any data on this, but I do see a lot of activity in the Netherlands. I'm a bit surprised that it doesn't seem like there has been. Obviously, there have been European headquarters moved from London to Amsterdam, but I'm actually surprised that way more went to places like Paris, Berlin, Frankfurt. But I don't have the data to really back this up. What I do think is that if you look at our data on the startup ecosystem in the Netherlands, it's just barely existent. It's not on the radar globally, and not even in Europe, which is very concerning. So and as you can see in our book, backed up by solid data, that really needs to change. So I wouldn't worry too much right now about foreign companies coming to the Netherlands and VCs moving to the Netherlands to do their thing. I would argue let's get the foundation in place. Let's get the Dutch angel activated, the government involved, as we discussed, to build that fertile ground. And also, we were talking about, hey, how can we leverage Dutch entrepreneurs in the Valley? But the same vice versa. These folks that made exits in the Netherlands need to be way more active in taking on a role in the startup ecosystem in the Netherlands. If you make an exit in the Valley, I'm not saying everybody, but the vast majority of people I know give back. So part of it is pay it forward, but it's not because of they're altruistic. It's they like doing it, but it's also a return on investment, right? They want to make money, but you see a lot of, not all their money, but a small percentage of their portfolio flows back into the startup ecosystem, and I think that's happening in the Netherlands, but not to the extent that it should be.
I think it's actually also interesting how a lot of the times you worry about brain drain, right? You worry about the people leaving Europe coming to Silicon Valley. But it actually, what we see is like a reverse brain drain, because it's like you said, Wibe, like when they have exits here, they go back. They eventually go back to the Netherlands and they bring it back. They pay it forward because that's the mentality that they have picked up from being here in Silicon Valley. I see a question from Roberto. What is the best approach that you have seen on how a country or region can connect with Silicon Valley, learn from it, and build a local ecosystem without modeling it as a mirror of Silicon Valley?
Helsinki, without a doubt. Yep, I've seen really good examples in China, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Beijing, but really, China is kind of an odd one because they're mostly 99% focused on the domestic market. So I don't think that's a good analogy. But closer to home, I think Helsinki has done a tremendous job. Highly educated people, risk-averse culture, and they just made it happen with all the parties, with the startup founders, with the folks giving back, a lot of folks in the ecosystem in the valley helping each other out as well as back home. It's all about the networks, and the government, by pumping more than $1 billion very early on in that ecosystem made a huge difference. Whereas the Netherlands is still complaining about wiring $60 million to tech lead. That's a joke. We shouldn't have those discussions. This is not a play about tens of millions of dollars or even hundreds of millions of dollars. A country like the Netherlands, if they really want to focus on innovation, if they're really serious about the welfare state, future-proofness, this should be $1 billion discussion.
Eva, I saw you nodding a few times. Is there anything you wanted to add to this?
No, I agree. I don't know Helsinki as well as Wibe, but I was also thinking of France is trying to really do it, right? So with the leadership of Emmanuel Macron, they're starting with pumping a lot of capital into it and like really connecting the different startups and the hubs to work together and still keep their French identity. That's a great point, actually, from the question that we emphasize in the book. You don't have to become Silicon Valley in the Netherlands. You can take what's working here and still apply it to your own culture and your own ecosystem without, importing the bad stuff. So.
Yeah, that's very true. It's like what the question already mentioned. It's not mirroring. It really is pick and choosing what works for you and your country, right? Okay, we have a question from Deborah van der Brande. Silicon Valley has a history of reinventing itself, also during the pandemic. Which examples of business ingenuity have stood out to you? And how did the ecosystem support such positive changes?
I will say that the big surprise for me this year is how Airbnb turned around. In the beginning of the year, I was like, there goes a beautiful company that just by external factors is dying. And they really turned the ship around. So I will say the way they, obviously they take on a lot of debt to keep going and fire 1,900 people, I think. But they really turned the ship around by focusing, just pivoting to what the new reality was really quickly and then having this mega IPO happen. So I think that's a really inspiring example. And the way their management team drove that, I think, is inspiring.
Wibe?
If I can speak to the ingenuity, how many people outside of Valley knew Zoom a year ago, right? And this is a great. If you haven't read up on the story of the founder of Zoom, that's a classic Silicon Valley story that would not have happened likely in a place like Amsterdam or Helsinki or Beijing. It's just unbelievable. It's a guy who came. I think he studied in the U.S., coming from China, and started working for Cisco. His startup got acquired. His first startup got acquired. He was an early employee there. Got acquired by Cisco. Worked on the WebEx product, which was crap, right? The user experience and the latency on the video conferencing, and he was not happy with the way they were innovating. So he said, "Let's do it myself." And he took a couple of people with him, and here we are. He had an IPO. and now half the world is using Zoom. It's just an unbelievable story. I think that's a great example of how we're reinventing ourselves, and the whole business model behind it as well, right? This was not, and the distribution, let's not forget distribution. This was not sold. This is a B2M distribution model. This is not sold through sourcing departments of large enterprise. This is sold with a very small sales force, and was mostly through what we call a very large clustering coefficient, mostly was distributed through the boardrooms in Silicon Valley. And that is, this is because it's such a tight network. This is very hard to accomplish, this type of distribution model outside the Valley. Forget about Austin, forget about London. Yeah, this is really a beautiful Silicon Valley story.
Okay, we have a question from Peter Wijsman. Should Dutch people living in the Bay Area and currently not in tech consider jumping on the train? If yes, why? And if no, why not?
Well, I ask myself that many times a day. Well, not a day, but I've asked myself that because I'd like to make a tech salary at some point. But so that would be a reason to do it. But I think in the end, if you're talking about people looking for jobs, I think you want to find a job and a career that suits you. And if tech's not it, then why would you pursue it, right? Everyone wants to do something that makes them happy. If you're talking about, starting a company, then obviously the capital is there in the Valley for a good idea in tech. So that makes sense. But I think just because you're in the Bay Area, doing something with tech is not quite the way to go.
Wibe, you wanted to add to that?
I mean, it's not for everyone, right? It's a very stressful environment. So it really depends on who you are as a person, and then where your interest lies. Yeah, because if you think just starting a startup for the money, you better join Google, because you're going to make way more than startup is just such a long shot. You really have to have a passion for it. Money is the wrong driver, even in the Valley, for that.
And I think that's a great advice for anyone in general, not necessarily Dutch people, right? For entrepreneurship, it is very hard, and you have to be, with that right mindset that's what you want to do, because it's not an easy road to go down. Okay.
So it's writing a book, by the way. If you want to write a book, do it because you're passionate about it, not because you're looking for a big payout.
Definitely. Okay, we're having so much fun, and when you're having fun, time flies, right? So I'm looking at the clock right now. We have a few more minutes left, and maybe I wanted to spend some time to give Wibe and Eva your last thoughts that you wanted to share with everyone. Maybe ladies first, Eva?
Oh God, I'm a little on the spot here. But my last thoughts is, well, obviously there's a great book out there for you to read and learn all the secrets of Silicon Valley, so you should definitely go out and buy it. I think the main point of the book that I wanted to get across, and that is much more broad than just lessons you can learn from the Valley, is their willingness to take risks, and a lot of entrepreneurs have this, but I feel it's especially present in the Valley, that people know the value of taking risks and know it can go wrong, but also in the event it goes right, that you can win so much and learn so much. And I think that mentality, I hope our book is an inspiring book as well for you to, even if you're not interested in starting a startup, even if you're not interested in being an entrepreneur, if you just want to change in your life and have thought about things for a long time, if our book gives you any inspiration or lessons on how to think over those decisions in your life, I hope you use those lessons and take the next step and go further.
And one of the chapters in the book is about it's kind of a conundrum, right? Because in order to found a startup, you need to have a strong ego, and you need to have, sometimes you just have to ignore. So this doesn't go well in the polder model, which is prevalent in the Netherlands, for example. So the interesting thing is that if you look at the folks, the startups, the founders that make the headlines, they're not always the friendliest people. They're not always the most easygoing people to get along with. and it's unfortunate because they will remain. You'll always have folks that are just on the spectrum, but some of them actually do well later on in their career. We've seen that with the founders of Google that built, same with Bezos, folks that build on their emotional intelligence capabilities later on in their career, whereas they were just downright mean in the beginning. But the reason why I'm saying it's a conundrum because it's a journey where, on one hand, you kind of need to be humble. We call that in the book moving from what I call the biggest weakness. If I look at the startup, it's not do they have a product market fit. I'm not even looking at the team. I'm interested in the team if I invest, for example. But the number one thing is, are the founders receptive to feedback? And this is a problem for people with too big an ego. Because you need to be able to listen and to understand and move from blind, what we call in the book, from moving from blind spots to weak spots. Because if you have weak spots, then both your board as well as your advisory board can fill in, right? They're on the sidelines cheering you on. They want you to be successful, but they also want to make sure that they cover your weak spots. Everybody has weak spots, right? I for sure have more than a few. So, but what we see a lot with startups that don't succeed is that they're not willing to move those blind spots to weak spots. And that is a big problem, and you won't be able to solve it. So even startups that have a great track record, do it very well, we usually see that sooner or later they're going to run against the wall because they're not listening. And some of the exceptions, and that's unfortunate that a lot of these exceptions make the headlines. Zuck at Facebook is a great example. But the majority fail, and that's what people don't see. A lot of these assholes out there, they just don't make it. You have to build up your emotional intelligence, and I think that's one of the great lessons of the book, where we've met with a lot of amazing experts in the field of emotional intelligence as well.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I mean, there's a lot of for sharing your knowledge and giving the advice and tips, and definitely a lot of thoughts for all of us watching to think about, right? On behalf of the NAF Northern California, I'd like to thank, again, Wibe and Eva, Dorrit with Holland in the Valley, and of course you, our audience. We hope you found the conversation informative, and we hope you will join us for future events. For more information on the NAF, please go to thenaf.org. And for more information on Holland in the Valley, please go to hollandinthevalley.com. And I think Dorrit will help us with putting that in the chat. Now, Wibe and Eva, I definitely had so much fun chatting with you today. But before you go, let us know, who is the winner of the free copy of the book? Who do you think asked the most intriguing question?
I actually liked Roberto's question because he mentioned that he doesn't want to mirror, like, how can you take the best of Silicon Valley without mirroring it? Because we get asked all the time, how can we be more like Silicon Valley? And our answer is always, take what's good, but don't be Silicon Valley, be yourself. So I love that he put that into the question straight away and had that realization already. So I would vote for that one.
All right, Wibe, you agree? You agree with that?
Yes, I always depend on Eva.
Congratulations. Please email us at our email address is nafnorcalboardchapter@gmail.com. So Roberto, please email us, and then we will arrange with you how to get the book to you. Dorrit, I think you will post our Gmail in the chat. Now, if you did not win the book, no worries. You can still get it, the ebook version, for 15% off. So thank you, Wibe and Eva, for making that available for our viewers. There's a code for that. It's Friends and Sherpas. And you can buy it at botuitgevers.nl. Again, that will be posted for you on the chat box. So yeah, thank you, everyone. Until we meet again, please be safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.